I don't. Okay, so last week we started the conversation about Yohanan ben Zakkai, and we are going to continue with it today. Again, what do I do? I'm just taking the sage that we meet, and then just kind of going into more depth about them, and that's the purpose of what we're doing here. And Yohanan ben Zakkai is one of the most consequential sages in our history because he was the one who basically saved Judaism. He and he alone saved Judaism. Now, we can discuss whether he deserves that distinction or not, because some very interesting people have claimed that he did not, or that he is not a savior or a hero, but something else. And we could talk about that in a minute. But the point is that he really is one of the most consequential sages, and we're going to find out why today. And when you'll be part of that dilemma today. So here's what we read both his early years and his character last time. So we're going to read a little bit about, so we did discuss his objection to the Sadducees, or we didn't? Okay, so again, as a reminder, at the time of, at roughly the time of before the destruction of the temple, the second temple, certainly after the destruction of the second temple, but prior, more importantly, the Jewish world was divided into 3/4 groups. One of them were the Pharisees, one of them the Sadducees, one of them the Zealots, one of them the Essenes. Now, the Pharisees are all of these rabbis. They are the ones who were transitioning away from the temple, the cult, the temple sacrifice, etc. And the Sadducees were the priests. They are the ones who wanted to maintain the, I'm just now for Jean's putting up another person, Laura. Oh, she's putting a second, I see. So, but for the sake of both of them, here's the, to access the document. So the Sadducees were the ones who were the priests, but also more importantly, the ones who wanted to maintain the way Judaism was prior. The temple, the cult, the sacrifice, all that. The Zealots, and we're going to meet the Zealots today also, but the Zealots were more aligned with the Sadducees than they were the Pharisees. However, the distinction between the Zealots and the Sadducees was simply that the Sadducees were working with the Romans for the purpose of keeping their jobs and maintaining the temple. And so the Sadducees were kind of cozied up with the Romans, Vichy France. The Zealots were strongly opposed to the Romans, even though they were, so they just differed in terms of their approach as to how to maintain the temple, right? So the Zealots wanted to fight the Romans. The Sadducees wanted to just be, subservient to the Romans, all for the sake of just managing and maintaining the temple. Okay, and the Essenes, by the way, were the group of the fringe, the sects, SECTS, just in case your minds went somewhere else. The sects that were, the most famous ones were the ones at the Dead Sea sects. These were the ones who Jesus, I think, was probably an Essene as well. These are the ones who kind of separated from that whole Jerusalem world and kind of, tried to separate themselves. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees are the main two groups that are fighting. One is saying, let's maintain Judaism as it is. The Pharisees saying, no, let's change Judaism into something new that doesn't include sacrifice and temple and all that stuff. Now, yeah, go ahead.
You said the Sadducees. Is that the word that I'm reading? SADDU?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just pronounced differently than
Sadducees, from the word sadok, or he was a priest. These are, so yeah, they're the priests. Now, okay, so what we're seeing is it's not just it's not just Republican Democrat, it's a real huge distinction and a way of viewing the future of Judaism, whether you want to stay the same or move forward and evolve. So Yochanan ben Zakkai was, all these rabbis that we've read about were all Pharisees. Maybe the early ones that we did, maybe the first weeks that we were having this class, I would always say these are the ones that were transitioning away, but they were all, we're going to meet one next time who actually is kind of like a hybrid Sadducee Pharisee, but that's just, oh, by the way, the point is that all of these rabbis are all Pharisees. They are all kind of saying that they're Judaism that is not about bringing grain and animals to the temple to sacrifice. I mean, it's pretty easy to kind of, when you wrap yourself around that, are we still okay with the way we were doing things before, or are we not? So all of the rabbis you read about are not okay with it. Some of the earlier ones were okay with it, even though they needed to see a transition, but they were the earliest ones, so you got to take it slow. So in this objection to the Sadducees, the story comes from the Talmud book of Rosh Hashanah. Again, as I've always said, and I will continue to say, just to remind you, that just because it's from Rosh Hashanah does not necessarily mean that it is about Rosh Hashanah, but it's something that had to do with Rosh Hashanah at first, and then these rabbis maybe go on a tangent or something, and they have a discussion. Right, it's exactly correct. Squirrel, that's you, the veterinarian would know that better than anyone, right? It's like, right, they go on a tangent. And so here we are. Now they're just talking about, there was a certain family in Jerusalem whose members used to die at the age of 18. And they did not know why. Again, as a reminder, bold means it's the actual text of the Talmud. Regular print means it's not in the Talmud, but it's helping you understand what the Talmud is trying to say. They came and told Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai. So somehow the message got to Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai that this family in Jerusalem everyone was dying, right? At 18 or at a young age. So they came and told Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai about their situation. He said to them, "Perhaps you are descended from the family of Eli, as it is written about them, and all the increase of your house shall die young men." That is so he's quoting 1 Samuel 2, chapter 2, verse 33, and saying, maybe you're from the house of Eli, right? Now, who's Eli? Priest. And chief priest, right? He was prophet priest, but no, he wasn't a prophet. He was just a priest, and he was the famous house, the patriarch of this famous priestly house, of which it's in the book of Samuel, comes from that house, or excuse me, goes to that house to learn. He's sent to that house, and then he leaves. If indeed this is so, the remedy is as follows. This is what Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying. Go and engage in Torah study, which is something that these priests wouldn't do. They don't care about Torah study. They care about sacrifice.
in the days of the temple, Torah study was not the big deal.
Correct. This is the origin. This is the very beginning of Torah study. Wow. When you've got these rabbis who, so Yochanan ben Zakkai is like, go ahead, engage in Torah study, instead of just thinking your sacrifices are going to do the job, right? And in the merit, so go and engage in Torah study in the merit of which you will live. They went and engaged in Torah study and lived, and people would call that family afterward by the name of Rabbi Yohanan in his honor. Now, so again, this story was his way of saying to them, all of your hocus pocus sacrifices don't work. And you might maybe the very fact that all the people in your family are dying at 18, well, maybe you really are a priestly family, And if so, I'm telling you, priestly families mean nothing. Torah study is what matters. And so this is kind of like this, not objection, yes, but it's his way of saying, you got this whole priest stuff is not working. You can be a priest, fine, but the sacrificial stuff and the cultic service just isn't working. Now, let's talk about, this is where the story gets great, and this is in the book called Gittin. Now, Gittin, if you take off the tin or the in of Gittin, you hear git, and git sounds like get, which is the divorce. Again, you will see nothing having to do with divorce in this entire story. Squirrel. That is a great way of describing it. Squirrel. So here we are. So, but this whole story, and it's somewhat of a long one, but it's got so much in it, and it is the essence of the whole Yohanan ben Zakkai story. So there's a prelude to the story in which we meet Yohanan ben Zakkai at the end. But it's an interesting story, and it also helps us understand something else a little bit later, and it's also kind of funny. It's like Keystone Cops. You know what the Keystone Cops are? There you go. You're young enough, Karen. So the context of this is, it's just prior to this story is going to be about how the siege of Jerusalem led to famine. Okay, now, so it goes, so, and this is the siege of Jerusalem in the year 70. So with regard to this famine, it is related that Marta bat Baitos. Now, who's Marta bat Baitos? I mean, I could tell you other stories about her, but it's not as important, only to say that Marta is probably, Mar in Hebrew means Mr. Marta could very likely that maybe her name was Missy or who knows, or Mrs. daughter of Baitos, like she doesn't even have a name, we're not even sure, but we do know that she's very rich. How do we know she's very rich? Lots of other places in the Talmud, but this story is probably just as good as any of them, because it says Marta bat Baitos was one of the wealthy women of Jerusalem. She sent out her agent, she has like a little worker, and said to him, go bring me fine flour. Now remember, this is, the context is that there was sieges being laid to this town, the town of Jerusalem, and famine is happening. So she says to her servant, go and bring me fine flour. Why? Because she's rich. Go get fine flour for me. And by the time he went, the fine flour was already sold. He came back to her and said, you don't know this, but bad news, Marta, the fine flour has already been sold. He says, but there is ordinary flour.
Bad news, good news.
Right. But good news is there's ordinary flour. Now, what's funny about this, obviously, is there's also, you can imagine the trepidation is was, we don't, they've sold out of all the good stuff, but I know that you're rich and you've never really eaten ordinary flour, but but that can get you ordinary flour. It is famine after all. What does she say? She says, go bring me the ordinary flour, right? So by the time he went, the ordinary flour was sold. He came and said to her, there's no ordinary flour anymore. But there is coarse flour. By the way, gushkara and samita, these are Persian words, which are in here, and that's why you never see these words. So there's coarse flour. So she said to him, all right, bring me the coarse flour. Right? Now, I think we all know what's going to happen, but I'm just going to read it anyway. By the time he went, the coarse flour was already gone. Remember, there's a famine. It's like they're looting in the streets. Right? He came and said to her, there's no coarse flour, but there is barley flour. Now, I understand that from our perspective, coarse flour, which means like nice, strong grains and oats, very healthy, very good for you, and barley, like a wheat barley soup, sounds delicious. But for them, barley was what you fed to your animals. No offense to that.
None taken.
So she says, because, but there is barley flour. So she says to him, all right, get the barley flour, even though I don't want it, go get it, I'll have it. But once again, by the time he went, the barley flour was already sold. It's like, it's funny. I mean, it's obviously wasn't intended to be comedy, but if you don't read comedy into this, it's like you have to, because it's, like why she didn't say to him, buy whatever you see there, right? Felt like he didn't have any type of agency to make these types of decisions. But the point is like, so that's what the funny part. But anyway, so Marta's clearly rich. She's clearly oblivious. She has no idea that there's probably looting and rioting going on in the streets of Jerusalem. She's stuck up in the penthouse over here. You can imagine him like trudging up and down the stairs each time. So anyway, the story continues. She had just removed her shoes, but she said, I will go out myself and see if I can find something to eat. She stepped on some dung, which stuck to her foot, and overcome by disgust, she died. I mean, to be perfectly honest, this is only adding to the comedy of it, right? So why did she take her shoes off? I can think of 3 possible reasons, of which I'm not sure which one it is. So, or 4, I've come up with 4 reasons. Number 1, maybe she's got Jimmy Choos on, you know what those Jimmy Choos are like, and she doesn't want to, and she knows it's kind of gross out there, and so she takes her shoes off because she doesn't want to ruin them. Or maybe she takes her shoes off because it's kind of more comfortable, like she's used to kind of walking and not on cobblestone or, on stones and rocks, but rather on a smooth floor, takes her shoes off. Or maybe she takes her shoes off because she wants to go kind of incognito. She doesn't want to be seen as like the rich person and maybe get mugged, so she wants to kind of do her best to kind of blend in with the crowd. Or maybe this was the one thought that I had earlier about this. Maybe she is doing it because she realizes this is kind of like a dire situation, and taking her shoes off in some way, shape, or form is like a measure of humility or kind of deference to God or something. Like she's gonna remove her shoes and just be, I'm not certain about what it is, but I'm kind of giving out some possibilities here. We don't know exactly why she took her shoes off.
Was the butt, to me, as an English major, with the butt, that implied to me that she had removed her shoes. Like if it had been like you said, she would have said, beforehand. If it were like what you were saying, I would think it would be she removed her shoes and said, I will go out.
It could be.
Since she says
But
but,
she doesn't say but. That's
okay.
that was
the
just
butt in.
the butt is specifically not it. Like that's
Okay.
the
Okay.
and is perfectly fine.
Okay. If you don't
Yeah,
mind,
'cause I
I
had the
will
same-
replace.
Right.
I was like,
So, but she steps on some poop, right? Which is just
I
so
had died years ago.
right. It stuck to her foot, and she died because she was just grossed out by it. Like that's how privileged she was, that the idea of stepping on some poop, which again, I don't blame her. It sounds gross to me too. I don't think I would die from it, but I would certainly be thoroughly disgusted by it. In any event, so now enter, this is like a this is like a play. And on so many cases, these, the stories of the Talmud really are like a drama play. It's like enter stage left is, now comes Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. We'll see it before. It's like, like he says to the Caesar, to Vespasian, we'll see this later. You need to find one of these. Enter scene right, one of these. Like it's really kind of like it's a beautiful kind of just the way that they, anyway. So enter stage left, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, who read concerning her. In other words, he is giving the eulogy at her funeral. And he read concerning her a verse found in the section of the Torah listing the curses that will befall Israel. Now, before and here is what the quote he says. He says, the tender and delicate woman among you who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground. And that is a verse from Deuteronomy 28:56. So that was the verse that when he was eulogizing her, he said, this tender woman who would not let the sole of her foot touch the ground. Now, that's all fine and good. What a nice eulogy, except when you know the context. And I think on many levels, he knew what he was doing. And he made that, it was like he referenced something, but only said the good part. Because listen to what the whole story is. Now, I have it, you don't, I'll read it. So what I'm going to do is read for you the 7 verses prior and 1 verse afterwards, but it's basically 7 verses prior. So the 7 verses prior are, God will bring a nation against you from afar. This is Deuteronomy. From the end of the earth, which will swoop down like an eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand, a ruthless nation that will show the influential no regard and the vulnerable no mercy. Now, so again, even though we understand, by the way, that the Torah was not written by God and not written, when, at the time, and so the Torah was certainly written long after the events of the Torah are recorded. And so therefore you can think that they would have the benefit of hindsight to kind of reference things, but they don't have the benefit. The Torah was still written, no matter which person is dating the Torah, was still written 4 centuries at the minimum, but probably close to 6 centuries before Rome. So certainly the Torah is not referencing Rome. What it might very well be referencing is Assyria. However, Yohanan ben Zakkai knows what he's doing, and he is referencing Rome here. He's using that verse to kind of be Rome. Does everyone understand what I'm kind of saying? Mm-hmm. So then it continues. It says, remember, this is before I said to you about the nation coming from afar, a ruthless nation that will show the influential no regard and the vulnerable no mercy. And then it goes on. It shall devour the offspring of your cattle and the produce of your soil until you have been wiped out, leaving you nothing of new grain, wine, or oil, which is exactly what's happening right there. Of the calving of your herds and the lambing of your flocks until it has brought you to ruin. It shall shut you up in all of your towns throughout your land until every mighty towering wall in which you trust has come down. Again, it's like exactly what's happening. And when you are shut up in all your towns throughout your land that your God has assigned to you, you shall eat your own issue. The flesh of your sons and daughters that your God has assigned to you because of the desperate straits to which your enemy shall reduce you. Can you believe that the Torah, probably haven't heard that verse before, the Torah is talking about how mothers and fathers will eat their children? Oh my God, right? The householder who is most tender and fastidious among you shall be too mean to his brother and the wife of his bosom and the children he has spared to share with any of them the flesh of the children that he eats. He's not even going to share the food that his children, because he has nothing else left as a result of the desperate straits to which your enemy shall reduce you in all your towns. And she who is most tender and dainty among you, and she was most tender, so tender and dainty that she would never venture to set foot on the ground, shall begrudge the husband of her bosom and the son and her son and daughter. Oh, that's the verse that he used. Let me remind you again. She who is most tender and dainty among you, or as they say, the tender and delicate woman among you who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground, shall be, now the rest of that verse is, shall begrudge the husband of her bosom and her son and her daughter. The afterbirth that issues from her. Like that is what the verse was. right? So I hope you understand just how remarkable this is. So number one, Yochanan ben Zakkai, A, is referencing a part of the Torah which really speaks to their current condition. And B, he is praising her, at least what seems like praise to her in his quote eulogy, because he left out like the other part of it. It reminds me of I have a cousin who's an artist, and he was doing an art show, and he had comments by critics about his art show, and it was like, and he had one comment which said, "Stunning, extraordinary, original," by this very famous art critic. And I was like, wow, Danny, that's amazing. It's really great. And he goes, actually, what the comment was, I wish I could call this stunning, extraordinary. And he just left the last words. Right? And it's like, yeah, boy, if you leave it empty, I wish I could call this. That's what it's like here. So he says, so anyway, amazing story. Anyway, back to his eulogy. He says, "The tender and delicate woman among you who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground," and that's all he says. "There are those who say that she didn't step on dung, but rather she ate a fig of Rabbi Tzadok and became disgusted and died." Now, what is that all about? Well, we'll find out in a second. What are these figs? Rabbi Tzadok observed fasts for 40 years, praying that Jerusalem would not be destroyed. So he took it on himself. This is Rabbi Tzadok, took it on himself to fast on behalf of all of the people of Jerusalem. Regular fasting for the sake of maybe God would look favorably upon his fasting and spare Jerusalem. He became so emaciated from fasting that when he would eat something, it was visible from the outside of his body. It was like a boa constrictor that eats a big deer, and puts that whole thing, and then you can watch the deer slowly make its way, and like the boa is like, it's like the snake has got this, it's like this flat, it's like this huge basketball in the middle of the body. Right, and that's kind of what it looked like. Tzadok was so emaciated that you could see a fig going down into his stomach. And when he would eat after a fast, they would bring him figs, something gentle, and he would suck out their liquid and cast the rest away. And it was one such fig that Martha Baitos found and that caused her death. In other words, so she would just, it wasn't a piece of dung. Instead, it was a sucked out fig that this rabbi. And the only reason why I mention it is because we'll see him again at kind of a very important part. And so I told that story, A, for the fun of it, B, for Yochanan ben Zakkai's clever eulogy, and C, because it gives you the proper context for a story that happens later.
So do you think she was a Sadducee and her family was? So
Probably.
he knew they wouldn't have read the Torah to know that he was digging her?
Yes, probably. But also, if you're rich, you're likely to, look, it's possible to be rich and not be a Sadducee for sure. But generally speaking, the Sadducees were the rich people. It's kind of like going back to our monarch conversation before. Like, yeah, you're a tutor. We get it. You got money, right? You may be outdated, but we get why you're rich, and we get why it is that you would be disgusted by a sucked out fig, or date rather, fig. Anyway, so so here we go. This is where the story becomes I wrote famous story, because this is the famous, really probably one of the most famous stories in the Talmud, all about Yochanan ben Zakkai. Again, bear in mind as we read the story, certainly our tradition has wanted you to think of Yochanan ben Zakkai as a hero and the savior of our people, the savior of our faith, of Judaism, which you'll see why in a little bit. But it's, perhaps he could also be seen as a traitor. And just balance
You
those.
mean if the Sadducees were still, if we were still a temple,
Close, you'll see. We'll see in about 5 minutes.
is this one of those, the victor always writes the history and says.
Yes and no, you'll see. Yes and no, it's not so clear. The Gemara relates. Abba Sakara was the leader of the Zealots. Remember, I mentioned the Zealots to you before. So these are like these are people who are true. They are not necessarily Pharisees. They're more aligned with the Sadducees, but it's not actually, they are aligned with neither. What they are we're going to fight these Romans and save our style of living. Now they are also called the Bir Yoneh, as you can see. That's the Hebrew or the Aramaic that's used. Now Birah means capital in Hebrew, so it's possible this could be like the guards of the capital. It's unclear, but that's the word that they use. But regardless, zealots. Also, Josephus, by the way, calls them Siccari, Siccari, and when the person who's Abba Sakara kind of makes sense that maybe he was the Abba's father and maybe he was the father of the Siccari, who knows? In any event, doesn't matter. Abba Sakara was the leader of the Zealots of Jerusalem and the son of the sister of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. So Abba Sakara is the leader of these freedom fighters, and his nephew, correct. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. So again, we just want to point out, just to go with that. So it's like we're talking about, two of the great, Yohanan is the great religious leader, let's call it, or rabbi of our people at that time, and this other guy is the general, or but he's not a general because that would suggest it's an army, but he's the leader of these freedom fighters. Yochanan ben Zakkai sent a message to him. Come to me in secret. He came, and Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, until when will you do this and kill everyone through starvation? Now, why? Because as we were seeing before in the previous one that we read about Marta, there's famine. And now the reason is because they are resisting the Romans and they are fighting and terrorizing the Romans. And so the Romans are squeezing Jerusalem harder and harder. And they are also terrorizing the people on the inside of Jerusalem, because anyone who wants to get out is also, they're not letting you out, because they're like, you're not going and defecting and being, you're staying here and fighting the good fight with us. So Yochanan's like, how much longer do you plan on killing everybody through starvation with these acts? Abba Sakara said to him, what can I do? For if I say anything, if I say something to them, that is his people, they'll kill me. Like, I can't, at this point, we're in it too much. I can't speak sensible, I can't speak sensible talk with them right now, because we've gone beyond, we're past the point of no return with these guys. I'm gonna zoom in on me just for the sake of that video in the future. Anyway, so he says, what can I do? They'll kill me. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, show me a method so that I will be able to leave the city. And it's possible that through this, there will be some small salvation. So he says to his nephew, who is the leader, and only an uncle could say this to his nephew. No one else could say it. He says, tell me how I can escape Jerusalem. I can't, because your people will not let me leave. So Abba Sakara said to him, this is what you should do. Pretend to be sick and have everyone come and ask about your welfare, so that word will spread about your ailing condition. Afterward, bring something putrid and place it near you, so that people will say that you died and are decomposing. And then have your students enter and bring you to burial, and let no one else come in, so that the zealots not notice that you are still light. because the notion dead, you've heard the expression dead weight. So there was this belief that you're heavier when you're dead because dead weight, but it's obviously not true. But anyway, he says, and so that no one will notice that you're still light, as the zealots know that a living person is lighter than a dead person. Okay, so what does that mean? So they are going to sneak him out in a coffin. He's going to play dead, pretend to be dead, not a coffin exactly, but like a body bag, and they're going to carry him out. And that is how Abba Sakara, the leader of these zealots, planned the escape of Yochanan ben Zakkai. But it doesn't end there. So Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai did this. Rabbi Eliezer, I don't know if we've met him yet. We haven't, but we'll meet him next week. Famous rabbi. Rabbi Eliezer entered from one side, and Rabbi Yehoshua, we'll also meet him later, from the other side to take him out. When they arrived at the entrance of the city on the inside of the city. So this is the guards who were of the faction of the Zealots wanted to pierce him with their swords in order to ascertain that he was actually dead, as was a common practice. So, they're going to say, right, they're going to, oh, you're dead, really? Let's, double check, right? So Abba Sakara said to them, the Romans will say that they pierce even their teacher. The guards then wanted at least to push him to see whether he was still alive, in which case he would cry out on account of the pushing. Abba Sakara said to them, the Romans will say that they push even their teacher. The guards then opened the gate and he was taken out. In other words, it was kind of like he was saying, don't waterboard, it'll make it on CNN, right? It'll look bad. So no torture, do everything by the book. And, yeah. So right now, and you can see this is just a continuation. There's no breaks. I've just broken it up for the sake of little chapters, little sections to read, but it's all the continuation. So the Talmud continues. When Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai reached there, in other words, when he was left Jerusalem and he was safely outside of Jerusalem, he said, greetings to you. Now he's talking to Vespasian, the Roman general Vespasian. He said, greetings to you, the king. Greetings to you, the king. Vespasian said to him, you are liable for 2 death penalties. 1, because I am not a king, and yet you call me king. And furthermore, if I am a king, why didn't you come to me until now? Why are you waiting this long? I'm putting you to death for 2 offenses. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai said to him, as for what you said about yourself, I am not a king. In truth, you are a king, if not now, then in the future. And if you are not a king, Jerusalem will not be, and if you are not a king, Jerusalem will not be handed over into your hand, as it is written, and the Lebanon shall fall by a mighty one. And mighty one means only a king, as it is written, and their mighty ones shall be of themselves. Okay. And Lebanon means only the temple as a state. So he comes up with some way based upon the Torah or the Bible to say, no, here's the proof. You are a king because you're going to be a king, because Jerusalem wouldn't fall unless it was to a king. And so that's why I said it. And then the second thing I want you to know, and as for what you said with respect to the second comment, if I am a king, why didn't you come to me until now? Well, there are zealots among us who didn't allow us to do it. Now, so Yochanan comes out and he's immediately challenged by Vespasian. So we're seeing now like something which happens in the Talmud all the time, which is like the king, the Roman king, and the great rabbi jousting. And here is the first joust number 1. And so Vespasian's, point 1 for Vespasian, counterpoint for Yochanan. And then Vespasian said, yeah, but what about the part about, you hadn't come out until now? And Yochanan said, well, there are zealots among us and they didn't allow me to do it. So that's kind of like, kind of a wimpy response, but we'll let it pass. But that's not like responding with words of Torah, but rather it's like, well, I couldn't.
So,
Yeah.
Rabbi, a couple of things. One, presumably he leaves because he sees that the zealots are going to bring about the destruction of the road.
Well, that it's happening. And what he's thinking is,
And
what he's
he
thinking
needs
is that the writing is on the wall. We're about to get destroyed here. I have to do something about it. That's why he leaves.
to-
He leaves to negotiate, not to escape.
Correct. However, that's the flip side is, if, does the captain, if the pirates are on the ship and they are, and they put a cannonball into the side of the ship, does the captain go running off to go see if he can save some of the things that were on the ship, some of the goods that were on the ship? No, the captain goes down with the ship, right? And so I guess the point is depending on how you see it, maybe you can, and by the way, that's just one thought, because you will see other people who will complain about it also, about what he did also. So the question is whether he's a hero and a savior.
Presumably he
or
knows he's going to go start the yeshiva and.
Well, we don't know that yet, but yes, that's what he's thinking is I'm going to go bring I'm going to take Jerusalem and make it a mini Jerusalem somewhere else.
And then the other thing is, it's just amazing to me always in these stories, what gets dramatized, what gets.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, he comes to the Roman camp.
And immediately
and
sees
he's-
Vespasian.
he's-
It's like,
Well, he's sitting up in the coffin. Nobody comments.
I'm not dead. It reminds me of the joke that says, there's a priest, an imam, and a rabbi who are all having lunch. And the priest, and they're all talking about what they want people to say when, at their funeral. And the priest says, I want people to say that I was, devoted to Jesus, in everything that I did, and that I was celibate, the Catholic priest was celibate, and that I never, said a sinful thing or even had a sinful thought. And the imam says, well, that's impressive. For me, I hope that they say of me that no one loved Allah more than me, and that I followed all the principles of Islam. And they said, what about you, Rabbi? What do you want people to say at your funeral? And he goes, I want people to say, look, he's moving. Right. So it's right. So that's what happens here. Yochanan is like, so he just finished. Right. Remember when I said about how it's like that it's like a big it's like enter stage left now. That's now admittedly I have left out a paragraph which we'll come back to later. So but still it's pretty much right afterwards. In the meantime, as they were talking, a messenger arrived from Rome and said to him, rise, for the emperor has died. And the noblemen of Rome plan to appoint you as their leader. So the moment after Yochanan ben Zakkai says that he's the king, it happens. Like, wow, good timing. What a coincidence. But whatever, because it's drama. At the time, so you want to get to more comedy, more Keystone, like again, at that time, Vespasian was wearing only one shoe. Like, how absurd this is, right? And when he tried to put on the other shoe, it would not go on his foot. So he then tried to remove the other shoe that he was already wearing, but it would not come off. And he said, what is this? So like you gotta like imagine at least what they're trying, like you're imagining a hopping Vespasian, right? They're going, get this crazy thing off my foot, right? And so enter scene left, stage left, Yochanan ben Zakkai to save the day. Yochanan ben Zakkai said, don't worry, don't be distressed or troubled, for good tidings have reached you. As it is written, good tidings make the bone fat. So in other words, because from Proverbs it says, in chapter 15, verse 30 is a verse that says, good tidings make your bones fat. So that's the reason why you can't get your shoe off. Or that's the reason why you can't put the other shoe on, because your bones are fat. Because that's the good news. You want that to be the case. But what is the remedy? Vespasian says, what must I do in order to put on my shoe? Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai said, have someone with whom you are displeased come and pass before you, as it's written, a broken spirit dries the bones. So the Torah has all the answers for you. Can't get your shoes on? That's fine, because you must have had good news. Best way of getting your shoes on? You need some bad news. You need to be sad, right? So what do? He did this, and his shoe went on his foot. So Vespasian said to him, since you are so wise, why didn't you come see me until now? So again, what they're trying to show is like, he's a miracle worker, this Yochanan ben Zakkai. I mean, obviously we know that this is an absurd story, but Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, but didn't I already tell you? Vespasian said to him, I also told you what I had to say. In other words, so he's like, don't ask me why I didn't come. I already told you. And then Vespasian said, yeah, but what about me? So Vespasian then said to him, I'm going to Rome, obviously, because I'm going to become the emperor. And I will send someone else in my place to continue besieging the city and waging war against it. But before I leave, ask something of me that I can give you. It's a genie. He has just rubbed the genie's lamp, and you get 3 wishes. Now, what would be the 3 wishes you would have if you were in Yochanan ben Zakkai's place? Well, Yochanan ben Zakkai said, give me Yavna and its sages. Give all the rabbis. Give me a place where I can go. And spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel. Talk about that in a second. And lastly, give me Dr. Steele, Rabbi Tzadok. He's the guy who'd been fasting for the last 40 years. That's why I read the story. But without knowing that story, you would never have known why it is he wants Dr. Steele, Rabbi Tzadok. Because he felt indebted to Rabbi Tzadok for all the fasting that he was doing on everyone else's behalf. It was like, can I get some doctors here? Rav Yosef read, here's where it gets a little interesting, the following verse about him. And some say that it was Rabbi Akiva who said it. So in other words, the writers of the Talmud are having a hard time determining who was it that actually said this verse, Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Akiva. But here is the verse that one of those two said. I am the Lord who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish. As he should have said to him to leave the Jews alone at this time. So Yosef and Akiva are applying a verse from Isaiah saying Yochanan is stupid. A wise man turned backward and makes his knowledge foolish, because he should have said, spare these Jews, not give me Yavna.
What is Yavna?
Yavna is the first yeshiva after the temple was destroyed. It's where all of the Jewish sages go to create Judaism. So when he says, give me Yavna, what he is saying is, let me somehow keep Judaism going.
But only the sages.
Only the sages, right. And
Was there anybody in Jerusalem other than the Jews?
yeah, no, not at this time. So, and I mean, sages, their families, whatever, but it's not like a town. It's really a town to maintain. Now, granted, there were Jews also living outside of Jerusalem, so it's not like all the Jews were dying except for the sages. But what he was basically doing is trying to preserve Judaism. Now, Jewish tradition therefore sees that as like heroic. He was our savior. But as you can see, Akiva or Yosef didn't necessarily agree with that. He's like, they should have spared all the Jews in Jerusalem. That's what he should have asked. He was giving me anything you wanted.
Because he didn't say anything about the zealots or the Pharisees.
Right. But no, they are the Pharisees, the Sadducees. They are the Pharisees. The sages are the Pharisees. So now, one thing that's interesting, Yavna, historically should know, is in the town. The Roman name for Yavna was Jamnia, and it was a Roman garrison. So it's possible when he said that, what he was really saying was, give me Yavna and the protection that would come, because I got a bunch of zealots right now who just found out that I'm alive. And I might need to be protected a little bit. Now, also, by the way, it should be, you could also know that is Yavna could come from so Yavan is Greece. So Yavani would be Greek, it'd be like as if to say Greek town. So, and considering that these people were intellects, and that it's not so surprising that they would basically say, let's go to the place where the Greeks are. Or know also that the word Yavna comes from the word boneh. Yavna, vana, bana is the same root, which means build. In other words, Yavna is the place where Judaism was going to be built up again. But now, as for why he wanted Gamliel to be saved, Gamliel was a rival. They were both sages, but Gamliel was kind of it's the equivalent of the Bush family. Actually, you know about Gamliel because we've been reading up until now in Pirkei, the son of Gamliel was this person, and it was like this family that always the leader of the Sanhedrin was either the son of Gamliel or his grandson or the next one. And so Yohanan was the one person that broke into that Sanhedrin leadership, the Jewish leadership role. And yet he was saying, save the Gamliel family. Like it was almost because he knew that at this time of great kind of unrest, he didn't want to add more to it by creating political wars within the Pharisees. Rather, he was like, spare these guys too. So for the sake of peace, essentially. So to go back to it, so now remember when I skipped that one paragraph in there. So here's the paragraph. Now it's the story of it's again, it's only a couple of sentences but so presumably though it comes right after not presumably it does, it comes right after, right when he is he sees Vespasian for the first time, and he says, and the zealots never wouldn't have let me go. He then says, understanding that Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai was prepared to ask him not to destroy the temple. So Vespasian predicted this. Vespasian said to him, if there's a barrel of honey and a snake is wrapped around it, wouldn't they break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In other words, I know that Jerusalem is a barrel of honey, but surrounding Jerusalem were all these zealots who are fighting. And, the best way to, would be just to kill that snake is just smash everything. And that, and then we don't have to, and that will kill the snake. So wouldn't it be better to break the barrel wouldn't it be worth it to break the barrel in order to kill the snake? In similar fashion, okay. And then it says, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai was silent. He didn't have an answer to Vespasian's statement. And that is actually, if there's one thing which is exceedingly alarming, is that, like, the Talmud does not ever say that the rabbis didn't have a clever response to something. That's what they do, is have a quick, oh, no, it says in the Genesis thing, whatever. So says he was silent, with intention, and he wasn't able to answer that about how he should have destroyed it. And so again, same Rav Yosef, and some say Rabbi Akiva. Rav Yosef later read the following verse about him, and some say it was Rabbi Akiva. So this is a repeat, but it's not the same. This is the first of two times that they were going to say this. Who turns wise men backward and makes their knowledge foolish? As Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai should have said the following to Vespasian. In such a case, we take tongs, remove the snake, and kill it, and leave the barrel intact. Why didn't you just tell him to take the tongues and kill, let's figure out how to kill the zealots without destroying Jerusalem? In other words, he is the Talmud is not the Talmud. We recognize the significant contribution of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai and how he saved Judaism. The Talmud is not so easy on him for it. They think that he could have done more to save Jerusalem and he didn't. Now, again, who's right and who's wrong? It's unclear. Certainly the generations after that have said that he was right to do what he did. But there's no, but I have to hand it to the Talmud for being at least being relatively honest about our own people and saying, it's not so clear. We wish he had done something different. So we have a few more minutes, but we have just a little bit more to go. And the story becomes less consequential. This is just the end. I don't even need to read it. I'll just this is his death, the death of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, that all the students, come around him and why are you crying? And he's crying because he knows that when you've done something to people, if you've made a mistake to a person, sooner or later, that mistake goes away because that person dies at some point. But if you've made a mistake before God, it's eternal, and he's dying, and any mistake that he's ever made, that's like perpetually going to be, in his face. And it's kind of a way of reminding people that, even the great Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai was worried about, having to kind of face God after he dies, and so shouldn't we?
So is there a bunch of time between this incident with Vespasian and when Zakkai dies?
Yes. Because he establishes Yavna, and he becomes and next week we're gonna read about not as much his teaching as much as his primary students, because that's the next Mishnah along the way, which is 2:8, which we'll do next time, which is the various, a little bit of what he said. I think we actually read that first part, the first half of it, about what he said. And then we're going to talk about his students, who are some of the great characters of the Talmud that we have. Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Yehoshua ben Parachia. These were the two rabbis who fought over who would be the teacher of Akiva. Anybody read The Orchard?
Oh, yeah.
Orchard, right? So it's like then you remember
All of this really is.
Yeah, this is all The Orchard right here. It's good. This is going to be great, right? So these are like this Orchard is a lot of the Orchard story. The Orchard is about how Eliezer is one kind of side. He was actually kind of a descendant of Shammai, and Yoshua is kind of a descendant of Hillel to some degree, and they are both kind of jockeying because they know Akiva is going to be one of the the greatest, and who's going to be the teacher of Akiva. But these at the time they're just students of Yohanan ben Zakkai. So
when you were talking about it, a bunch of people give ben Zakkai the credit for saving the Jews. Is it this incident?
Yes,
or is it
this very incident
later at Yavna?
This
is
this and how he establishes the yeshiva at Yavna and has some great students who then become the teachers. And so he's like the tree trunk, which is the beginning of the limbs that will go out and then become but ultimately ultimately the mission. So until now, all there is in terms of non-sacrificial or cultic Judaism is just some of these kind of little stories and aphorisms. But it's starting from Yavna, which is when we'll start to kind of put together the pieces of the Mishnah, which will become the beginning of, even though the Pirkei Avot is the Mishnah, I understand it's a little complicated, but just the point is that what he's also doing is re-envisioning Judaism into law as opposed to sacrifice. And so prior to this moment, it wasn't like they were going to services 3 times a day, and it wasn't like they were keeping some measure of kosher, but not full, because kosher hadn't been established yet. They, Judaism for them was what was happening at the temple and the Levites and the sacrifices and all that. And he is the one who goes to Yavna and then with these other rabbis start saying, let's rethink Judaism.
So the analogy that comes to our mind is the founding fathers of the United States are given credit for the Declaration of Independence and War of Independence from Britain, but also the Constitution. If 14 years later, they didn't come up with the Constitution and lay the foundation for what we have, then the revolution wouldn't have been.
Would have been of no consequence. That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he is, so yes, he. Now, again, to what degree is this absolutely historical? No idea. But what we do know is that it is historical to say that he established Yavna.
Yeah.
Now, what was the context of him establishing the, this first yeshiva, or this first kind of center of Judaism at Yavna? Was he already there? Was he running? Was that kind of, did he find safe haven? And I called Yavna a Roman garrison, which it was. Was the circumstances to which he found himself there different than, maybe they wanted to create a more glamorous birth story for Yohanan ben Zakkai. Who knows?
Couple of weeks, we'll be talking about things that came out of Yavna.
Correct.
That's what-
Or yes, for sure,
Yeah.
at least for a while. I mean, but then it probably will, for the next couple of weeks.
So we can
Aren't
judge
the-
for ourselves.
Aren't the zealots some historical also?
Oh, yeah. The zealots are the ones who end up going up on Masada and who fight the last fighting. I mean, they were.
Last fight of the Romans.
Yeah, the last fight of the Romans was on Masada. These were the zealots. So no, I'm not saying that this is like, it's not like the Torah in which, you're kind of struggling to like distinguish between, separate the wheat from the chaff and distinguish between historical and fiction. But this is a historical document, but some of these kind of like stories about the people, like the myths about the people, could very well have been fanciful writing. But I mean, it's all kind of, but at its core, there's a history here to it. There's no question Yohanan ben Zakkai lived, that he established Yavna, that he had these students, all that stuff is absolutely correct. Whether they snuck him out they very likely could have snuck him out in some sort of a casket, who knows? Whether if that's the case, or maybe he was never in Jerusalem in the first place and he just showed up at Yavna, and established Yavna. Maybe, I don't know that. It's so hard to believe that all of a sudden he just gets brought straight to Vespasian. But then again, I suppose if you're the leader of if you're at least the spiritual leader of Jerusalem, and you are not in favor of these zealots and what they're doing, I suppose it's not out of the realm of possibility that Vespasian would be interested in talking to them, maybe to get some sort of like a strategic edge. Hey, all right, well, what's the weak part of Jerusalem? How do we, that's not said here. That's just me thinking it. Like, so maybe he got to talk to Vespasian as a result of that. But, there are some fanciful things. I mean, any type of miracles, and he did this that whole story of Marta is playful. But it was to make a point. When that was the point to show Rabban was Yochanan's ability to predict kind of what was going to happen in his eulogy, maybe, or was it just to kind of show the kind of squalor of Jerusalem? Maybe that's the purpose of it. Whether there was an act. I mean, who knows? I can't speak to the historicity specifically of it, but it's within a bigger context of historical, even if it's not specifically history. Anyway, all right, this has been fun. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. Next week we'll be back specifically to Pirkei Avot, but I'm going to continue doing this. So we're going to learn about the next week. It's going to be about all the students of Yochanan, but then we're going to start learning specifically, more about these students, because that's the fun part, is getting to know, especially Yehoshua and Eliezer and Elazar. I mean, these are fun characters that are worthy of learning about and embracing and knowing your history and knowing your people and knowing your founding fathers. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Be well.
Thank you.
Rabbi, are there any connections